Rachel, I am so excited for my audience to get to meet you today, and to, hear this chat and to hear your work. Like, we're going to share some of your stuff today. So thank you so much for being here. It's just been like too long coming for me to actually get to see your face and
Yes.
interact with you.
Yeah, we've been talking for years through email and Fathom poetry and
Yeah, yeah. I'm going to give some folks some background on how we know each other and some of your work real quick. So, the first thing I want to say is that I know that so many people who clicked on this podcast episode or are watching the clip, they're doing it because they love poetry. And that is great. This is going to be your jam. You're going to love everything about it because we're going to geek out really hard about poetry. It's going to be great. But then I've got a whole bunch of folks who are like, I don't
right.
think I like poetry. I don't know anything about poetry. I'm going to ask that you hang in there because we're going to convert you. What I love about Rachel's poetry and her work and the way she interacts with it too is that it's very, very accessible. We're not going to do poetry in a way that makes you feel like you need to wear a beret and it's awkward. Like, we're going to talk about real life, but it's just going to have a cadence to it, right? Your work is so beautiful in
Oh,
that way. So that's what we're going to do today. Like you were alluding to already, like, I met you through Fathom. So
right.
this is this great magazine. Dr. Sandra Glahn introduced me to it. She sent me there initially to try to get some of my stuff published, and you guys have been gracious enough to run some of it. And then I discovered your work. I mean, you were the editor there, so I was interacting with you anyway, and I looked up your work and I was floored.
Oh.
I was floored. The stuff I was reading on Fathom was just gorgeous. And
Mm.
then I discovered Blue Tarp, which was your first release.
Yes. Oh, you read that one?
Oh, I did. Yeah, I ordered all of them. Yeah. And then
Okay,
you
not that
didn't.
many people have read that first one.
I did read that one. I ordered Blue Tarp and Two Funerals Then Easter at the same time. And then, of course, you have the newest release, which
Yeah.
is mostly what we're going to be talking about
Okay.
today.
Awesome.
Sometimes Women Lie About Being Okay. Yeah. I love that cover too, by the way. It's just
Oh,
gorgeous.
thank you.
But all three of your books, the whole collection, like every single one of them, they're beautiful. They're completely accessible. They're raw. They're vulnerable. I'm sure you have read because you get submissions all the time as a poetry editor, like poetry that's just like kind of meant to be coin.
Pretentious.
Yes. Okay. We don't do that. No.
Oh, and I've never liked the kind of poetry where it's a riddle, where it's like only the people who are smart enough get to get something from this poem. I don't read that kind of poetry. I don't like it, and I don't write it.
You do not write it. You do not write it. You write real life in the most beautiful way.
Mm, thank you.
And
That's
so, like I said at the very beginning, I'm so excited to get to share some of that because there are so many of us, and I still say us, even though I quote unquote write poetry.
yes, you do.
Like, I didn't know that I liked poetry. I did
Mm,
not know that I wrote poetry until Dr. Glahn told me.
is that right?
That's correct. Yes. I
Oh, I
turned
wouldn't have
something.
known that from reading your work. That's cool.
Yeah. No, I had no idea. I turned in something that I thought was flowery prose, and she and Jed were like, "Oh, we've got a poet." And I'm like, "A what?" And they're like, and I'm like, "No, that's not what that is." And they're like, "Yeah, that's poetry." And I'm like, "No, I don't like poetry." And Dr. Glenn said, "Well, I don't know what you're going to do about it because you write it." So,
That's awesome. I love it.
and so I discovered that I do love poetry. And again, I had just interacted with poetry I did not understand, that felt so inaccessible, so over my head. I would love for you to share what you think poetry accomplishes in the world, what the purpose of poetry is, so to speak.
Oh, wow. That is a huge question. I think all poets would answer this question a little differently.
Yeah.
But it is interesting to look at history and to see that so often what directed movements were words,
Yes.
either songs, poems, prose. And so it is interesting that, and even if you think about politics today, my husband was just commenting on the fact that like we vote for people based on their speeches. Like
Mm-hmm.
that is how we vote for. I mean, really, when it comes down to it. And so words and how we say them, whether it should be this way or not, really are what determine history. And
Mm.
so in that bigger sense, I think poetry has always been important. But that's not really why I write it. I'm not necessarily thinking of history when I write poetry. I'm thinking of individuals. And specifically, when I write poems, it's how I process life. So it's how I process pain. It's how I process joy. It's how I process just uncertainties. And I have good friends I can talk to. I've had a brief stint with counseling, and those things are all really good.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, just specifically for me, and maybe for anyone, for someone listening, writing poetry has been a way to name things that I can't name in any other context.
Yes.
And that's been a really important part of my healing. But then it gives me the ability to name something for someone else too.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe gives them the words they didn't have, or gives them the bravery to write the words that they didn't think they could.
Yes. Oh, that's beautiful, Rachel. I was thinking through this question too, since I asked it of you. I'm like, okay, well,
Yeah, what's your answer? I'd love to hear.
I'm with you. I think every poet's going to answer it differently, but also along the same lines. Like, I think that art and poetry just being a medium of art, whether it's visual art or music, I recognize the truth of this in music, which I am such like a music dork. Like, I love music. It's on like almost constantly. So I recognized it in music before I understood it or saw it in poetry. But I feel like what art does is it allows us to tell the truth and receive the truth in ways that we normally would not be open to.
Oh, I'm writing that down. Tell and receive the truth.
Yeah. I mean, it just helps us. I mean, it helps us do a lot of things. It helps us notice,
Yes.
whether that be beauty or pain, a form of prophecy, and not in this like crazy, like biblical, like, but it's a way of truth telling.
Exactly. That's right. Absolutely.
When I read Wendell Berry's work, I call it the prophet Wendell Berry, because his work is prophetic.
Yeah. Yes.
It's beautiful.
Prophetic truth-telling definition. Yes,
in the truth-telling definition. Like, how do you tell us the truth in ways? And if you think about some of our favorite songs, they tell us the truth in a way that we normally would not be open to hearing that.
Yeah.
And it gives us a way, a medium to tell the truth in a way. And one of the reasons why I try to interact with creativity as part of the Holy Shift is because God tells us the truth through beauty all the time.
That's right. Through his creation. I mean, I think he speaks his beauty and his truth through creation in ways that, well, that poets can't even put into words.
Yes.
And saying something.
How do we make space for tension, for questions, for grief,
right,
for lament, for joy? Like, how do we make space for that? And then how do we give voice to that and give words to that? And
absolutely.
That's what I love the most about your work. Not only are you just a gifted writer, but because you do it in such an approachable way, because you are sharing snippets of your own story, your own grief, your own lament, your own celebrations.
Yeah, that's right.
I am now able to interact with mine.
Oh, wow.
And so
that's an answer to prayer right there. That's what I pray as a poet.
Well,
so thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, that's what your work does. That's what your work does. It has been a balm and a salve to me countless times. I'm just really excited, like, to share the work with other people, because I know so many people who are hurting right now and they don't know the words for it. They don't have an outlet for it. I know a lot of people who are celebrating, and and how do you put words to joy? Well, we can't, but we do the best we can with music and with poetry and art,
Right.
Yeah. The other thing I like about poetry, your poetry, this is not always true of Christian poetry. So I'm going to harp a little bit on, yeah. So sometimes I think with Christian art, we feel compelled to put the happy ending and the tidy bow. And we feel like every song we write or every poem, at the end, it has to have this clean little ending. And I actually want to free somebody up out there. Go read the Psalms. They don't all end happy.
Nope.
And also, like, we don't have to, if we're working through grief or we're working through lament, like, we're always going to be postured towards God as Christians. But we do not have to, in every circumstance, have like write poetry that moves in a linear fashion or is doctrinally sound. We are allowed to be angry. We are allowed to ask questions.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think that art gives us the freedom to do that. Okay.
And the Psalms, I mean, like you
Yeah.
said, I think of Psalm 77, and it is your goodness at an end for all time. I mean, theologically, we know his love endures forever,
Mm-hmm.
but we also have all felt that question in our hearts.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think you're totally right that anyone who's thinking that Christian poetry has to always preach a specific message at the
Mm-hmm.
end should read the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And they will see poetry in the Bible that lets humans be human
Yeah.
and God be God.
On the back of Sometimes Women Lie About Being Okay, you wrote, "Poetry is my love language, my lament language, my way of wrapping hope around a fig tree." And I just wanted to read that really
Mm.
quickly before we actually get to hear some of your poetry. So now with that, I would love if you would start with one of my favorite pieces from Two Funerals Then Easter, Tangled. I'd love for you to read this one because
Mm.
this, one, I just love this poem. Two, I feel like this is a good representation of what this collection
Yeah, this sums
interacts with.
pretty much like maybe my poetic philosophy.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's true. So this is Tangled, Two Funerals Then Easter. When will you realize, oh my soul, that there will always be a child born on the same day that someone else dies? That it is not selfish to be happy, even with wreckage in your rear view? That it is not within your power to untangle joy from pain?
Mm, very nice. And I
Mm.
think that's what your work does the best, is
Mm.
it lets those things coexist.
Mm. And they have to, right? Because even our cultural moment right now in the last few days has been just devastating
Yeah.
with recent shootings and things. And I think the question always lingers for us, which is, okay, do I live in the pain of what's wrong with the world, or do I live in the joy of what's good, or can I do both?
Mm-hmm.
And can we do both at the same time and be respecting both? And I think the answer is yes, because there's no other way to live, right? I was reading about these children who were murdered, and my daughter's trying to hand me a book to read to her, and what am I going to do? Am I going to say, yeah, I'm going to scoop her up and I'm going to take in her life, you know what I mean? And I'm doing it with lament for those who can't anymore, but
Yeah.
I'm still going to scoop her up and smell her hair and read her a book. And I think that's one of the hardest things in life, is that joy and pain are always holding hands.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to go on living with that. And I've encountered a lot of people, and usually they're poets. I think it's kind of a poet's soul kind of thing, but they feel guilty being happy when someone else is sad, or the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what my poem was trying to capture, which is just that good and bad things happen on the same day, and
Mm-hmm.
we accept them both with open hands. That's all we can do.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful, Rachel. Thank you. Okay, I want to move to your newest release
Okay.
now, and it's gorgeous. I love the
Thank
title.
you.
Also, talk to me just a second. Tell me what it is, and you've kind of touched on it, but tell me what it is you're hoping that this collection might accomplish for
Mm,
the readers.
it's a good question. I mean, I should say first and foremost, when I put a collection together, so I have two people in mind. I have my audience and then just myself. Like, am
Okay.
I telling the truth about my own life? And so for me, as I was putting it together, what I was telling myself was, this is a season. I'm capturing a season, because what I do with my poems is I gather years worth. You know, this one was probably 4 years worth, maybe four. Yeah, four. The one before it was like 2 years, and the one before that was 15. So
Okay.
but gathering these seasons of my life and trying to see what the arc is, the story arc,
Mm-hmm.
because not in an artificial way, but, and this is even just practical advice for anyone who's putting together a poetic collection, that if you gather all your poems and you put them all out, print them all out, and put them all out on the floor, you'll start to see a story being told.
Mm-hmm.
And some might not fit. You might say, okay, that one doesn't fit, or you leave it in because you like it. But you see an arc naturally, whether you intended it or not. You'll see themes. And so what emerged in the last few years for me was the continued tension between joy and pain. But here I was on the other side of a beautiful second marriage where I was actually getting to enjoy love. And so you'll see a lot of the joy of marriage in this book, which is exciting. If you read Blue Tarp and even Two Funerals, you see some really hard poems. So you see the joy of marriage, but then also the longing for family. And so just personally, my husband and I both, since we were both married before and we're a little older now, we had both kind of given up on the dream of children. And then when we were able to get married, we still had this little bit of time where we thought we could maybe have a child together, and maybe that dream isn't dead. But then as you see, as you read the book, that we just lost child after child through miscarriage. And so I have some pretty vulnerable poems about miscarriage. And I say that as maybe as a trigger warning, but also my hope would be that anyone who's dealt with pregnancy loss or infertility would be comforted by these poems and feel less alone. That's why I shared them, because I write the poem for myself and I publish it for others, right? But then there's joy because God gave us this incredible baby girl, Hildegard, who's just sometimes she doesn't even seem real. She's very real. She's 1.5 and is starting to disobey, so it's very real. She just is such a gift. And I think because we're a little bit older and because we lost so many children, we just marvel at her every day.
Sure.
And so you'll see that too, that those poems of new motherhood. And so that's what this collection's about. But the title, that's actually something my husband said to me, and I recorded it in a poem.
Yes. And I would love for you to read that poem.
Okay.
If you would.
Yes, that one is that's the first poem in the collection. It's really simple and short. It's called My Pack. You bring the dog with you when you think I'm sad. I hear the stairs creak and Frank's collar jingle as you travel as a pack to our upstairs bedroom where I lie reading my phone on our bed in the dark. I say, hey, baby, and Frank. And you say, are you sad? And I say, I told you I wasn't. And you reply, yes, but sometimes women lie about being okay. And that's true. Sometimes we do.
Beautiful, Rachel. And yeah, this whole collection is you working through some of the grief, and you did that beautifully in the other books too. And then getting to celebrate that you have seen goodness in the land of the living.
That's right. And that's my husband and I's like life verse together is, I believe that I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living, and believing that can be true even after you've seen the worst of life.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
very nice. Very nice. Okay. So I made a list of things I need to hear you read, please.
Okay.
Awesome. And I'm going to tell you my favorite, number one, my favorite title, possibly of all time, but my favorite poem and my favorite title of this collection. Hold on. I got to find my page. I've got too many things. Oh, here it is. I've got way too many things bookmarked in here is the problem.
Oh, that's such a compliment.
Grocery List Heretic.
Yes. That's a fun title.
Great title. Rachel, it's fantastic. And also talk about a way of telling the truth and like showing the contrast between the life you were living before and the marriage that you are now enjoying with Evan. So would you read us this one, please?
Sure. Okay. Grocery List Heretic. What would an honest poem about marriage look like? It would include your socks, of course, scattered on the floor, fueling stereotypes and memes about men and marriage, but it would also include the grocery lists I text you, that you follow religiously and add to heretically, surprising me with my favorite things like yellow flowers and fancy cheese, dark chocolate, and most recently, a Christmas tree. You never make me feel like a burden that is too heavy to lift. He's a good husband.
Wow.
It's out there, ladies.
It does exist.
It does exist. I'm experiencing it.
Yes, that's wonderful. It's just beautiful. And I got this in the mail. And when we first moved out to where we live now, which is kind of rural, the UPS man just refuses to come up the driveway and drop a package. Like he does it now, I think because I have like some rather assertive signs at the base of the driveway, but he would just drop stuff down there. And
They make
so,
you walk down the driveway to get it?
well, that or it just is out to the elements.
Right. So anyone can just walk by and pick it up,
Mhm. Or it
it's
can get rained on or whatever else.
oh
Yeah.
goodness.
So when your book came, he had just left it down there at the gate and it had rained on it.
Oh.
And so I didn't know it was this book, but I could tell it was a book, but that's kind of a daily occurrence in my in my world that books are in my driveway. So I, grabbed it and I was all angry and threw it in my car and I went into town and I was getting gas and I ripped it open and saw it was your book and was so relieved that it had not been damaged.
Oh, good.
Yeah, it was totally dry and I cracked it open and this was the first book or the first poem I read.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I just burst into tears.
Oh,
Joy for you. You know
oh,
what I
so
mean? Like
sweet. Yeah,
having read through your journey.
right. If you've read Blue Tarp, if you've read Two Funerals, then you're kind of like holding your breath that I will get to experience joy.
Yes. And
Yeah,
then that last line, you never make me feel like a burden that is too heavy to lift. Right?
yeah,
Oh, oof.
yeah. That's an answer to prayer right there.
Yeah. Oh, it's really, really beautiful.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see. Also on my list. Oh, please read Do Not Wait.
Oh, okay. I know I've got that one marked. Okay. This one felt like I was trying to channel Mary Oliver a little bit.
Okay.
She's probably my favorite poet. Okay. Do not wait. Do not wait to rejoice. Do not wait to enjoy. Do not save and forget to spend yourself walking up a tall hill just for the view. Do not say, when it is quiet, I will find the quiet, chase it, walk to where the quiet lives, and pray while watching a bird hop on the ground. Do not worry about bringing a pen or taking a picture. It is meant to be fleeting, a vapor, a brief moment to reintroduce yourself to God.
Mm,
Hmm.
this is so gorgeous.
Hmm.
That's so gorgeous. And then just for the listeners, like I have other titles in here. The Tree of Knowledge. Okay, so those of you who read my poetry and know that it's 90% about trees. Good things that are still good, even when your heart
Oh,
is breaking. That's
mm,
another beautiful one. You've got, I mean, like I said, I've got so many bookmarked, and there's not time enough in the world for us to read all these. And besides, I really want people to buy your
oh,
book and get to sit down with them and interact with them. And again, your stuff is not like long or like,
mm-mm.
I don't know, like,
You could pretty much read any of my books in one sitting if you wanted to.
yeah,
Might be a lot to take in, but
yeah, and then go back and savor. And I've done that, like torn through big sections and then gone back to these
that's the
books.
way to read poetry, I think, is to take a collection, like read the whole thing, and then to go back and just savor poems here and there. That's what I do with other people's work as well.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
And then always have a pen with you when you're reading poetry, because you never know what might come out of you as you're reading someone else's work. And so if you order my book, get yourself a little, a notepad, maybe go outside, be in nature. It's almost spring, and write what comes out.
Yeah. Yeah. And let it out.
Mm.
Absolutely let it out. Well, and I may have you guide us here in a second on ways we can do that. But before we
Mm-hmm.
go there, could you read one more
Sure.
thing for me? Really, this whole thing is beautiful, but on page 63, that first paragraph of By the Rivers of Babylon,
Yeah. Oof.
you read that. That's just gorgeous.
How many paragraphs? The
Just
first
that
one?
first one. Yeah. And so y'all need to know that there are other paragraphs that you need to read that come right after this. But here's a little taste
Okay.
of where she's going.
This was an imaginative reading of Psalm 137. By the rivers of Babylon, we sit and weep. I scoop water into my hands and splash it over my face. Shock and ice, relief and purity. My hands need this coolness, this shiver, for they throb under constant use. I run my fingers across the calluses that have formed. My hands ache the way my heart aches. An instrument I used to love to play now feels like a slave driver. I strum the songs of my youth, but lately I play them through tears.
Let's say we want to try our hand at poetry, whether we think we're ever going to publish
Mm-hmm.
anything or whether we just want, to express our own like sorrow or our own joy. Like
Yes.
give us a little poetry guidance and coaching. Like how can we try our hand at this thing?
Sure. Okay. So I was a high school English teacher for 10 years. I love creating assignments. And so
Oh, perfect.
one day I will write a book that is poetry prompts. I promise. I
Okay.
have it works. I'm even talking to a publisher. I have a baby, so
Hmm.
don't know when I'm going to write it, but I think about it a lot because if you don't think that you are a poet, at least give it a chance because chances are you are a poet. I mean, it is really amazing what can come out of you. So, because poetry gives you a freedom, like you were saying earlier, we can say things we couldn't say in any other context.
Mhm.
You'd written down that you wanted to talk about the poetry as my love language, my lament language. And I had written down that poetry is love, that things often go unsaid, but poetry gives you a place to consider the people in your lives and to name their value. And so I wrote down that it might be interesting for listeners to try this. Write a eulogy for someone who's still alive.
Oh.
Yeah. So, we think about all the things we would say about someone that we love and we've lost. And a eulogy, as we know, is the speech you give at someone's funeral about that person. But write a poem that is sort of a love letter to someone who's still alive, or what you would say at their funeral, but you still have them. You still have the chance to say it to them while they can hear it. You don't have to show this person. So if you're listening and you're like, oh, I want to write it about someone that I'm in love with, but it's unrequited love, do it. You don't have to show them, but get it out. Name those feelings, name the pain, name the joy. Maybe it's your mom, maybe it's your spouse, maybe it's a best friend, and you know that they know that you care, but you've never named why. Think about what you would say at their funeral. Okay, so that's kind of dark. But the other thought was sometimes it's fun to take a title from someone else's collection and to try to write your own poem underneath it. So
Oh,
I have that poem that's called Good Things That Are Still Good, Even When Your Heart Is Breaking. And it's kind of a list, like, ice cream and blah, blah, blah. Write your own poem with that title. Good things that are still good, even when your heart is breaking. And you start that poem, don't even worry about form, just start listing things. And what will happen is you can shape it into a poem.
I love that.
Okay, so
That's
that's
super doable.
I have one more. So
Oh,
there's three. So people can totally choose. See, I am a teacher at heart.
I love this. Love this.
I read you a paragraph from the imaginative reading. So poetry sometimes can be prose. You can kind of combine the
Mhm.
two. Pick a psalm or even a passage in scripture, a chapter, a story that you've always loved, and try to take it and think about what isn't said. So, like you think about the woman with the flow of blood, for example, how
Mhm.
the woman reached out and touched Jesus' garment. We know so little about her.
Mhm.
What if you wrote a poem about her? What kind of background would you give her? What do you imagine? Now, I know it's scary to say imagine in the Bible, but I really do believe that it's a beautiful thing to think about what life was really like for these little snippets of stories of these people we read about. I don't think it's heretical as long as you're not saying that you're writing new scripture.
Mhm.
Imagine what the woman with the flow of blood's life was like before
Mm.
Jesus. Or imagine, I wrote about Psalm 137, what it was like for them to have to play their instruments for their slave keepers. So pick a passage of the Bible and start writing a poem of imagination, filling in the blanks.
Beautiful.
So
Great prompts. Thank
three to
you.
choose from. I can't always respond, but if you ever want to send me your poem that you've written, feel free. And also, you can send it to Fathom. We
Yeah.
always have prompts for our issues, and you can email it to me or Hannah, and we will be excited to read it.
Yes. And y'all are wonderful to work with.
And I can put up the prompts too if you want me to.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, I'll do that.
That'd be great because I want to share those on the blog as
Yeah,
well.
that'd be
So in the
fun to
show
see
notes.
yeah, maybe we'll have a hashtag for them so that if people want to post them and share what they write on Twitter, we can be able to see it. Should it
I
just
love it.
hashtag the Holy Shift or the Holy Shift
Um,
poetry?
yeah, let's do poetry because I have a hashtag for the Holy Shift creativity, but
Okay, so
let's
the
make it
Holy
specific
Shift
enough.
poetry. Perfect.
Yeah, let's do that. And we'll make sure and include that on the show notes too so people can remember that.
Because that's part of the joy of poems too, is sharing them.
Yeah, I want to read them. So whatever you guys
Cool.
write,
All right.
especially your list, I want to
Yes. Okay. So I'll type those up and I'll email them to you right after this so you can post.
awesome.
Okay,
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you so much for chatting with us today. I can't wait for people to get to dig a little further into your story and your work. Thank you
that
for
would
all
be an
the,
honor.
well, you're putting some great goodness out into the world, and I'm grateful for it.
Thank you, friend.